plan. Last session, I believe we got through about half of the presentation, and so I gave a high-level overview of just what the statewide transition plan is, and I'm going to hit it a little bit, and then I'll turn it over to Michelle, who will get into the quality oversight activities that our QIO is involved with. So just to, I think I'll go straight to, this is kind of the key concepts that we addressed, and this is really the foundation for the statewide transition plan from a federal level. And these are the expectations that CMS has placed upon us in order to make sure that our statewide transition plan assures that all of these activities and initiatives are in place. So it's it requires that each of the settings are integrated into the community, that they provide access to community resources, that it optimizes individuals' autonomy and initiative within the community, facilitates choice regarding services and supports. They're selected by the individuals among settings. So really, it really identifies that all of the settings were residential and non-residential HCBS services, and that includes habilitation services within that concept of HCBS. That those services are integrated in, and folks that are receiving services in the residential and non-residential settings have full access to the community just like everyone else. And so the statewide transition plan that we have developed and are in the process of finalizing is really our plan on how we are going to assure that those settings meet the standards today, because we have to have all the settings need to be in full compliance by March 17th of 2023. So it's coming in within the next few months. So we need to assure that all of those settings are meet the standards for integration into the community by that time, and then we have an ongoing process to assure that that the settings are in compliance a week from St. Patrick's Day, a year from there, 10 years down the road. So it's really a plan to say, here's how we identified getting all those settings assessed, and then here's how we're going to monitor on the long term to assure the settings compliance in the long run. So those are the basic key concepts. We defined kind of what a setting is, what it's not from an HCBS perspective, and then talked about provider-owned and controlled settings, the heightened scrutiny review, and that was the process that if we identify settings that aren't in compliance or appear not to be in compliance, that we have a process to review them, to make sure that if it appears that they're not able to meet the standards, that we review them, make sure that they are, put it out for public comment, and then send that on to CMS for their final blessing in order for HCBS services to be provided in those settings. The issues that we're having right now is really the new facilities that have been built recently. And they were definitely are going to go through a heightened scrutiny review process prior to even having funding available in those settings. So we're kind of working through those things. And that's really what I think CMS was looking at through this process was, a lot of the settings across the country, not just in Iowa, but across the country, have really been facility based. Those larger, 8, 10, 12 plus bed facilities. And from a community integration and from a access to the community, CMS really likes the smaller settings. So anything that's new construction really has to have this heightened scrutiny review in order to make sure that before we even fund it, that the services and the processes and how services are delivered in those settings really have to meet our standards first. And then CMS takes a final review to say that, yes, it does meet the standards and HCBS funding can be there. So that's kind of what the process we're going through right now.
So, Brian, can I jump in? That's prospectively, is that right? Prospectively.
Yes, for those new construction in particular. And CMS called that out specifically. And then if there was settings that that we've identified that have the appearance of, we may have to take a look at them if they've not been able to provide services. So a new assisted living program that's right next door to a nursing facility that has not been, it's not been involved with HCBS. This is something we would take a close look at to make sure that they're in compliance prior to funding being available in those settings. So most of the settings we've gone through and done reviews, they're in compliance. We're down to a very few that are, they have corrective action plans in place. We've accepted those. We're going through a compliance review process right now. So really, there's not many settings that we're taking a close look at. But prospectively, moving forward, it's really those new facilities or new providers that have not identified or not established any service delivery that we would take a look at prior to funding. And I think that was kind of my highlight. Last time I took an hour. So Reader's Digest conversion version of it. So I will turn it over to Michelle to get into more of the nuts and bolts of how the QIO does the oversight. You want to switch your, do you want to put your screen up?
I'm on it here. Give me a second. There we go. Everybody see my screen now?
Yep.
All right. So our role with the QIO HCBS unit is we're responsible for quality oversight, and we do technical assistance to providers of HCBS waiver and habilitation services, which includes HCBS settings requirements. So we do those same things for HCBS settings requirements. And our team has a big part in implementing and also designing the Iowa's statewide transition plan, Iowa's plan for how we're going to come into compliance by March 17th, 2023. So we have a big role and responsibility in that. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we do that in general, how we do quality oversight and how we're specifically looking at settings. And I think what's important to you guys as MCOs is when you start bringing on providers and even case managers, they have roles as well in making sure that Iowa stays compliant and being able to discover some of the data about compliance across the state. So click in the right spot. All right. So here's our general approach to how we do quality oversight. We have a discovery process, which is identifying and assessing. We have a remediation process. That's how we help providers address areas of concern and noncompliance. And then we have an improvement process that includes some reassessment, demonstration of compliance, and then just ongoing perfecting systems and processes for providers. And so there's a little kind of gear example of how they all work together and they're all continuously going on and working together. That's our general overview. Talking a little bit more about our discovery processes, we have several tools that help us discover what's going on across the state. We have our annual self-assessment and an address collection process where we find out where HCBS is provided across the state. We have our quality oversight reviews is sort of our main thing that we do. We have we review applications of new providers that come in. We review at regular intervals, we do a certification and periodic review. We do a focused review, a targeted review, all different types of reviews that we do. We also can do some setting specific evaluations. If there's a specific setting that we need to go look at, a location or a site that we need to look at, we're able to do that. We use the residential assessments that your case managers are or will be completing with individual members that help us understand what's going on in that member's residence and whether it's compliant with settings. We use the Iowa Participant Experience Survey results as well as pieces of evidence in our review process and our discovery process. We also look at incidents and complaints that come in for providers and members. And then sometimes we just get referrals and notifications that help us discover what's going on across the state. Our remediation includes things like if a provider self-identifies an issue and corrects it, that's remediation of a problem that was discovered. If we provide some TA to them and say, hey, we think that you should do this, or some recommendations, and they implement those, that's remediation of a discovered problem. They might have a formal corrective action plan related to a review that they have going on, or they might need to be like Brian said, a lot of our providers, when it comes to settings, are in the compliance review stage. So we're looking to do a follow-up review to make sure they carried out that cap and that they're in compliance. So those are all remediation processes. An improvement, this is just ongoing implementation of corrective action. Like I said before, continually perfecting processes. We have several touch points with quality oversight at various intervals that help providers stay on track and help us discover regression or emerging issues. So that's just a quick overview of our entire quality oversight process and how we do things. When it comes to settings, it's just sort of a mirror of the overall quality oversight process. So we discover those issues with settings in kind of the same or similar ways: the annual self-assessment, address collection tool, through our regular review processes, through some setting-specific evaluations, residential assessments. All those same things are ways that we can discover that there's an issue or something that we need to take a closer look at when it comes to settings. Brian touched on heightened scrutiny and what categories require heightened scrutiny review, and those are the three main categories. So settings located in a building that's also a publicly or privately operated facility. Category 3 is the one where we discover or find the most providers falling into. It's a setting that has the effect of isolating individuals receiving Medicaid, HCBS from the broader community. So almost all of our providers that need to go forward for a heightened scrutiny review at this point in time fall in that category 3. Another thing that we try to make sure that all providers know, and it's important for you guys to understand too, is just because a setting meets a category of heightened scrutiny, or even if a setting has to go forward for a heightened scrutiny review, it's not, it doesn't disqualify them from participating in HCBS. So they can still be an HCBS provider. They might have to do some work to come into compliance or be able to demonstrate compliance with settings rules. We might find that even though they meet a category of heightened scrutiny, they've already done things to become compliant, and they really don't have new work to do to become compliant. So it's not like a punishment, or it's not a bad thing necessarily to be on a heightened scrutiny review list and go forward for a review. In most cases, what we understand is that CMS, when they do a heightened scrutiny review, when we refer for a heightened scrutiny review, they're going to, they may like concur with Iowa's initial findings of compliance. They might have some additional feedback or things that they want the provider to work on. Or it's still a possibility that they could not concur with our findings and decide that the provider isn't qualified to get HCBS funding. But I think the large majority falls into either they concur or they have just a few additional things they want the provider to do to work on. So I have a couple slides on here. This presentation was originally designed for providers and for them to understand how the heightened scrutiny reviews will go. So there's some good information on these slides that you'll have access to that explains exactly what our team would look for if we were doing our own kind of review of a provider for settings. And then what we would look for if we think that they need to make some changes. and then how we would look at them afterwards to make sure that they carried out that corrective action plan and that they can demonstrate compliance. One thing I wanted to touch on that's kind of a hot topic right now is we have a lot of providers that are transitioning from facility services like an ICFID, some RCFs, and they're transitioning those settings to be HCBS. And over the last year, there's been just a lot of those. So we've actually wrapped some processes around those and have come up with a way of evaluating them and providing some standardized technical assistance to those providers so that they kind of are aware upfront of some things they need to look for. And then we can circle back at the end and after they have a setting to review, and we can do some setting specific evaluation of that location. So facility HCBS conversion, sort of a hot thing going on right now. We have some that is affected by settings. We also have the new IRSH service starting up and a lot of providers coming on as IRSH providers that we do some of the same type of review for. And then, like Brian said, the ones that meet the category of heightened scrutiny and hadn't previously demonstrated compliance by some other review process, or like a new provider coming on, a new presumptively institutional setting, like a licensed facility, or an existing provider opening a new setting. So those are kind of the ones that we're keeping an eye out for, these conversions, the new IRSHs, and anything that falls into one of those heightened scrutiny areas. This is just a little bit, this is what our standardized technical assistance for a facility to HCBS conversion would look like. Some of the things that we're telling providers, keep an eye out for this. And again, some of the providers that meet a category of heightened scrutiny, like those newly presumptively institutional settings, like the newly licensed facilities that we were talking about, some of those require prior approval from CMS before they can get funding in those settings. So Brian had touched on that real quick, but we do have one specific setting in the state that built 2 new licensed facilities, and that's going to have to go forward to CMS for prior approval before we can fund in that setting. So that's something that's important for like the individual MCOs to know when they're determining if they should fund those members in that setting. We have, otherwise, we just have a couple providers who are still trying to work on coming into compliance with settings across the state. I believe all the residential providers that are, except for the new ones that had never been reviewed for compliance prior, all of them have been determined to be compliant with some sort of quality oversight review that we've done prior to July 1st, 2020. So everybody has demonstrated compliance except for a few providers. And I feel good that those few providers they're not residential providers, they're non-residential employment providers. I think they're going to be able to do something before the end of the transition period on March 17th, 2023. So that's where we are with that. We did implement a process earlier this year where we started notifying providers who still had some stragglers out there with corrective action plans or compliance related to settings that they needed to clean up before November 30th, 2022 is the deadline we gave them, so that if they couldn't get it done, then members had a chance to transition to a compliant setting or make alternative plans prior to that March 17th, 2023. So that was a notification process that they might be experiencing a shortened timeline to come up with a corrective action plan or to implement that corrective action plan. So everybody except for the 2 non-residential providers that I talked about before has been able to do that, but way before November 30th, 2022. There are no residential providers going forward that had not been able to demonstrate compliance. Let's see. We do have a lot of processes in place. It's sort of built into our regular quality oversight, this review of settings. So it's part of the self-assessment. There's questions on the self-assessment that ask the provider to assess themselves as to whether or not they're compliant with settings. And that is done annually. And our quality oversight reviews are built off of that self-assessment. So the things that we look for when we go out on site, we're looking for evidence of compliance with all those things on the self-assessment and verifying at the same time that what the provider put in their self-assessment is true and accurate. And we also use the residential assessments, which I want to just talk about real quick. The residential assessments are a tool that case managers use to assess the individual member's residential setting. And so it's the questions that they ask them are specifically related to the member's experience in that setting and whether it complies with the setting's requirements. And our team actually manages the flags. So if anything popped up that said, hey, there's a concern with this member in this setting and it needs to be addressed, that would come to our team. And then we would actually circle back around to your case manager and work with that case manager to remediate the problem or address the problem with the setting. So the residential assessments process, that's one way that the MCOs work directly with our team to resolve issues. We do hope to do a training in the near future with case managers to help them understand specifically what their role is with implementing the statewide transition plan and ensuring compliance just going forward. So we're hoping to do that through the competency-based training platform that we have available to us. The rest of this stuff, I think we've already kind of touched on. There's a lot of information out there related to the statewide transition plans, to the settings rules at the state level and at the federal level. There's just a lot of information to sort through. So these are just some starting points for you. The Iowa Medicaid website has a statewide transition plan page. You can actually go to that page and there's a link to the published statewide transition plans that we've already published. We're in the process of, I think, the 5th update to the statewide transition plan. We submit something and then we get feedback from CMS and then we try to address the feedback and then we get further feedback. So we're still in that back and forth process to get to a final accepted, approved transition plan. We have an initial approved transition plan, and now we're trying to get a final approved transition plan. I think only about less than half the states have an approved plan at this point in time. So that is something we're working on. You can learn more about home and community-based services in general by going to the website at the top. And you certainly can visit also the CMS website has a lot of good information about all the states and how they're implementing the settings final rule as well. So what kind of questions do you have? Or Brian, is there anything that I missed that you might want me to touch on?
I might want to just add that, you know, the kind of the components from the MCO side of things is that residential assessment. And I've included a copy of that assessment tool in with the information that's available to you. And I can run through it real briefly if you want to, but and there's a training online. I think we did a webinar a couple of years ago that we're going to be updating probably prior to your case managers getting on board. So that will be available to you. And I think Michelle talked real briefly that, you know, that when the transition plan started, when the regulation started back in 2014 at the federal level, at the same time they implemented person-centered planning from a case management perspective, and a lot of the person-centered planning concepts and expectations kind of dovetail into the statewide transition plan or just the settings compliance, choice, opportunities, involvement in the community, and really tailoring that person-centered plan into services and supports that fully integrate folks into the community. So a couple of things from your end that you'll want to make sure that your case managers are on top of is really that fully embracing that person-centered planning process, because it really integrates in with the whole settings and settings regulations.
Brian, did you say you have that document that you could go through? Before you do that though, can I have a follow-up question for Michelle? If you go back to slide 21. On slide 21, you talked about facilities transitioning to BHCBS, right? I think that's the slide, right? So 21. Is that housed on one of those? Yeah, or 20, I guess, and 21. Is that housed on one of those websites, these facilities that aren't transitioning? I mean, do you have a formal process of capturing it? We talk about when you become aware of this. Is that housed somewhere, ones that aren't making that transition?
No, it's not publicly posted somewhere that that demonstrates when a provider says that they have interest in making this transition. Now, what will happen is at some point in time, they would have to surrender their DIA licensure in most cases. And so that, they would get removed from the DIA website. And we just try to do a lot of collaboration between DIA and the SMEs on Iowa, with Iowa Medicaid to make sure that we're all following along together through this process. So that's how we do that.
And I would add that almost all of the providers that are transitioning, they're the small, 5 to 8 bed ICFIDs, community-based services that they're converting those settings over, and typically they are both an ICF provider and are currently a waiver provider as well. So, they've got the experience. It's just now they're making the decision to say, we don't want to license these anymore. We want to truly incorporate these into HCBS and get the HCBS funding for it. So, that kind of communication would be happening with your case managers as well as they start to make those transitions.
Thank you.
Yeah, they wouldn't be able to do that without engaging the interdisciplinary team to get those members specifically transitioned over.
Yep. And then if you
that we hope to update that residential assessment before to just align it with the self-assessment settings sections and some other things, just to align them all. So what you're seeing now is an example.
So do you want me to go to that assessment tool? I can pull it up real quick.
Can you just quickly, because it's being recorded, I know it'll be in the materials, but again, for folks that are reading or reviewing this later, just just offering quick insights. Doesn't have to be lengthy, but anytime you can offer insights to documents that folks are going to look at later.
Yeah, so the residential assessment tool is done on an individual basis. It should be done with the member on an annual basis, typically around the renewal or the service plan renewal year. Let's see here. So basic demographics, just name, ID, services received, the service providers, and who the assessment was completed by. And so what we wanted to do is really identify kind of what type of a setting it is. And so for folks that are currently in residential settings that don't really need a review because they're living in the family home, they own their home, they're renting from a landlord in the community just like everybody else. We've really identified that we don't really need to dig into the services that are provided in those settings because they're already fully integrated into the community. So then there's the ones that are provider owned and controlled, and you'll see the next section, part 2, gets into more of those. Here's what we need to take a look at. Is it on directly adjacent to a private institution or a public institution? Is it a licensed facility? Is it where more than 2 members receiving services live together and receive waiver rehabilitation services? So it's getting a little bit more into where those services are being provided. And then from there, so part 2 is where we say, okay, you got to dig a little bit more and go a little bit further. So from there, we took an outcome-based approach to understanding, because everybody's involvement in the community or interaction with the community is really person-centered, and it's based on what your preferences are. You know, are you, you know, if you talk to anybody, whether they're receiving services or not, the way that they interact with the community is really based on personal interests. You know, so people will, you know, if they have sports that they like, if they have interests, if they have arts, you know, it's really up to the individual to say, oh, here's resources in the community that I'm going to be able to tap into. So we're really trying from an outcome-based processes to understand what's important to the person and how are they achieving that outcome. So are they choosing where they live and with whom they live? You know, which is integrated into the settings, is you should be making choices on who you live with and where you live. And there's 9 of these outcomes that, and each one of these has a series of questions that guides the case manager to say, you know, here's some opening questions on, you know, how are we sure that you are making choices, you're making an informed choice. And it's not limited to these. You know, a case manager has the ability to kind of venture off into other questions if something comes up to say, oh, you know, I need a little bit more information on this. So it's a starting point, not an end point, as far as getting there. Then they make a determination on whether they choose to, in this case, choose where they live and with whom they live, and then just give some feedback on what kind of information they got from the member through this basic interview assessment process. Members choose their daily routines is the second one. Members choose where to work and receive day services. So it's, again, if you go back to those major kind of points that CMS was looking at, is they're saying, you know, do you have choice in what you're doing, where you live, how you interact within the community? And that's basically what all the questions or all the outcomes are looking at. Do you choose where you receive services? Do you manage your own personal resources? And what's nice about the outcome-based process is that it's not necessarily you have to be managing those resources, but if you have the opportunity and have control over it, do you? Or is it controlled by the provider? And if it is, you know, we know that there's a lot of outcomes that members don't really have control over, or that they need assistance with. And if they do, then we just want to make sure that those kinds of processes are in place to support the need for those kind of limitations or those rights restrictions that are often managed. So it's not right or not wrong, because a lot of people don't have the skills to manage it and actually manage their personal finances, for example. But if they do need assistance, then it needs to be identified within the service plan that they do need assistance. So it's not a bad thing. It's just that they need assistance, and we want to make sure that those kinds of things are identified. Members are treated with dignity and respect. Members use community resources. Again, it's going back to what's important to you. Do you go to church? If church is important, do you go to church? You know, do you use the malls, the restaurants, the recreational centers, the movie theaters, all those things? If that's what's important to you, are you able to access those services and get the support you need to interact with those services? They have access to their home and community, so it's getting into more of an accessibility thing. Do you have home modifications that are available to you to make sure that you have access to your home? And the last couple are, do you exercise your rights and responsibilities? And
Did Brian freeze? Michelle, are you still there?
I think you might have froze.
I thought it was just me. I looked up and nobody was moving either.
So did I. And I saw Michelle still moving. So I was like, it's not just me. I know he's almost done. Anything to add, Michelle, while maybe Brian comes back? I know I appreciate him going through this for our folks who will look at this later, especially.
Well, how about this? Do you have any questions that I can address while he's unfreezing, thawing out?
Rich, Lauren, others?
I don't.
So what the residential assessment essentially does is it gives a place to assess and document members' experiences in a setting. And so he's just kind of going through and explaining all of the things that we assess for, or that your case managers would assess for. And just the reason why it makes a lot of sense for a case manager to do such an assessment rather than like our team of quality improvement from the quality improvement organization is that they're already in there. They know the member. It's appropriate for them to go into private homes and meet with members and see what that setting is like, where, you know, you wouldn't have a reviewer from our team, you know, showing up at somebody's actual house and doing an assessment. So it's the right fit for that assessment. So we have to work closely with them to be able to use that information and to assess the provider's overall quality and ability to meet settings requirements. So. And like I had said before, we're hoping to update that form just so that it specifically aligns with the provider's self-assessment that they're doing. It specifically aligns with our review questions that we ask for, and also to allow for better data pull from the form itself. Some of the free write areas make it hard to pull data in a meaningful way. So.
Yep, thank you. I've answered all my questions. So I don't know if anything else from our team or insights from the MCOs, but I really appreciate this. I appreciate Brian when you thank him for doing the walkthrough for the extra context.
Very good. Any other questions? Oh, it looks like Brian thought
I'm back. Sorry, the last couple of days I've had some connectivity issues.
You're good. I think we're good.
It up, Brian. We just kind of summarized it, and
Okay.
They asked a few questions, and
You got to the big three questions at the end.
the flag questions.
Yeah.
No, we did not get to those, but there are. You can go ahead and explain, Brian, if you like.
Okay, so the first 9 are really getting at the last 3 issues. And this is where what we consider those flagged questions that we would follow up with is, you know, the member has access and opportunity to use community resources to meet their needs, yes or no. If it's no, then we've identified some issues that need to be followed up on. Anytime you would answer no to any of these questions, we would get back and talk with the case manager and say, hey, there's either some rights limitations that aren't addressed in the plan, or the member's not getting the support that they need in order to access services, or they have rights limitations, or they're not being supported in a setting that supports where they work, live, and recreate. So those are really the 3 kind of main questions that we're looking at. And if we have a negative response to that, then we say, oh, let's follow up with this because something's not right, or there's, you know, it can lead to a lot of quality issues, or it might just be, you know, an individual issue, or, you know, whatever it is. But either way, these are the ones that we want to explore a little bit further, just to make sure that that when people are wherever they receive residential or non-residential services, that they truly do have full access to the community based on their needs and their wants. And the supports that they get in order to be there. So that's kind of the foundation of the report, of the assessment tool. I lost the. I guess I should have done this. So here's the. I forgot I wasn't sharing anymore. So here's the bottom line. Here's the 3 questions that we would do the follow up on. Kind of as needed. And again, we're looking to make some modifications to this. We developed this tool probably 3.5, 4 years ago. And so we realized that some of the data that we should be gathering, the assessment tool is not gathering some of the stuff that we need. So we're going to be tweaking a little bit further, and then we'll have another full training to kind of update that for case managers. So any other questions?
I'm good. Rich, anything else? I appreciate you taking the extra time to go through that and connecting the dots between the forum and presentation. So I don't know if we have anything else from our side, but thank you so much.
Yep, and one of the things we do is the assessment tools, once they're completed, they get uploaded into OnBase, so that we can then gather all of it. We can query it and identify, how many were done, what the responses were on each individual question. We can verify some of the locations of services where members are living, that kind of a thing as well. So it's just a tool that gives us lots of information about settings. Anything else?